We turn now to the surprising vote this week by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. To talk about what the Brexit means for Britain, the United States, and the world, we turn to Rana Foroohar, Time Magazine assistant managing editor, and the author of a new book, Makers and Takers. David Ignatius is a columnist at The Washington Post. David Rennie is the Washington bureau chief at The Economist. And Mark Zandi is the chief economist at Moody's Analytics. David Ignatius, I want to start with you. Very simple question. Why did this happen?
As we look at this, I think we can see that for many years, the momentum of the post-war world, the institutions, the EU, prime among them, has been slowing and now has been reversed. I think there are many reasons for that. Partly the rhetoric of integration was always more extreme than popular support would have allowed. Again and again, year after year, European leaders said ever wider, ever deeper. But when this was put to votes in countries, even like France, which we think of as the center of the European Union, France turned down the EU constitution when it was put to French voters some years ago. So I think the public has always been more uneasy about this union than the elites who had a vision of it and certainly profited from it. And we've run up against a wall. I just would note that economic globalization is here to stay. Economic nationalism is not a viable idea. Political nationalism clearly is strong. It's powerful in Britain, it's powerful in Russia, it's powerful everywhere. But you're not going to reverse the way in which the world's trade flows are now bound together. And I think that's the problem that the British people have to think about.
David, pick up on this thread. What do you think caused this? Was immigration a bigger deal than the economic pinch?
So some of the forces are the same we've seen in a ton of rich Western democracies, and clearly here in America. You can look at the demographics of the Trump vote and you can see echoes in the Brexit vote in the UK. It tended to be people without college degrees. It tended to be older people, pensioners, people who lived in small towns out in the provinces, kind of the places we would call Rust Belt here in America. But I think the tragedy, and I think this is where David is right about economic nationalism, that kind of empty promise, is when we were all watching the results come in on Thursday night, one of the first places to vote decisively to leave, it was a big shock, was a northern sort of Rust Belt town called Sunderland, which voted massively to leave. The most famous thing about Sunderland right now economically is it's home to a gigantic car plant owned by Nissan. And Nissan had warned that they might have to reconsider making cars for the European market in the UK. Because if you're a big multinational and you're trying to decide, can you sell cars or whatever you're making into Europe with so much legal uncertainty over the next few years, why would you keep that plant there? So for us, at The Economist, the tragedy is these people's pain about the changing world and globalization, increased competition is clearly real. Elites haven't listened to it carefully enough, but they're committing economic suicide.
So the people voting for it are the ones likely to be hurt from it. Rana, what do you think are the implications? Help people who are kind of wondering what this all means. Give us some concrete implications of this.
Well, I think what Brexit says is that there has been a major trust gap between the elites, both in Britain and everywhere else, and the mass population. And I think that this is down to 40 years of globalization, which at a global level has increased prosperity and within many countries has increased prosperity, but it has also created groups of losers, economic losers. And I think that establishment parties, not only in Britain, but in the US and many continental European countries, have not been so great at saying, okay, here are the people that have suffered and here's what we're going to do for them. Until quite recently, it was unthinkable to question whether free trade was an unadulterated good. And as I say, it does increase prosperity at a global level, but we have to start getting better in the US and the UK and continental Europe at figuring out how to help the losers.
Mark, about 40 seconds, the fallout from this. What do you think is going to happen immediately?
Well, I think the UK is going down the rabbit hole. I think this is going to be really tough for them. I think a recession is likely over the next 6-12 months. For the European Union, this is going to hurt, but I think they can digest it. I mean, the EU is a big place, and the UK is big, but I think the EU is big enough to take it down and not go into recession. For us here in the United States, I don't think this is a big deal. I really don't. I mean, if this doesn't lead to a broader splintering of Europe, that would be a problem for everybody, including us. But barring that, if what we're seeing now is what we're going to get, I think the U.S. economy is going to be just fine. In fact, there's some benefits to us. I mean, capital starts flowing into other places in the world that are deemed to be safer, and that would include the United States.
All right, we're going to take just a quick commercial break here, and then we'll be back and have more conversation. So stick with us. We'll be back with our panel in a moment. And we're back with more from our Brexit panel. Rana, pick up on what
Yeah.
Mark was saying. What does it mean to go down a rabbit hole? What are some of the implications of this?
Well, so I want to push back a little bit. I agree with Mark that, it's not like the UK going into recession is going to kill the US economy, but it has already had some big implications. For one, the Fed is keeping interest rates low for longer, in part because of the volatility that this has created. There's a lot of reasons that the Fed might want to start raising interest rates, so it's having a big implication. And I think it underscores the fact that central bankers everywhere are still left holding the bag. We have national governments that are gridlocked, that are more and more nationalistic. That leaves central bankers doing the heavy lifting. We need to get beyond that. We need to have some real fiscal policy to create a Main Street recovery rather than one that's been genetically engineered by the Fed.
For the average American, and that's what what matters most, it's not going to affect their job. It's not going to affect the wages that they're going to get, their wage increases. It's not going to affect their stock. The stock prices went down Friday. We saw that. But they had run up significantly prior to that, and we're exactly where we were at the start of the year. So for the mortgage rates could even be lower as a result. Again, going back to the capital flows into the country.
Could
and lower
raise the
interest
dollar,
rates.
though, which would affect trade.
David, what happens tomorrow in the UK?
Well, one of the things that I think is really shocking for people in the UK right now is that the very disparate and rather diverse group of people who led the campaign out, you had some kind of free market, liberal, romantic nationalists on the Tory side, you had some basically anti-immigration people. They've kind of gone into hiding. They don't know what to do. They're the kind of dog that caught the car. And we just don't know what their plan is. And there's now a kind of, the entire of Westminster, London is focused on a Tory leadership challenge and now possibly a challenge to the Labour leader. So there's a lot of navel gazing. I think they're missing the big picture, which is geopolitics. And to get back to the point about should America worry, let's take the geopolitics of this. I'll tell you who's really panicking is the German government. Angela Merkel has intervened twice now to say everyone should calm down. Why is she so worried? Angela Merkel, who is probably America's most important partner in Europe, is terrified of a European Union in which that large voice for globalism, for liberal, outward-facing kind of ambition, Britain, has left the room, leaving her with a very weak France and a southern Europe that's still very much closed in on itself. She does not want to be left in Europe without the Brits there. She is panicking, and that should panic America.
And David, pick up on that point. If Angela Merkel is panicking, is it in part because she's worried about Russia? Is she worried about China? There's no longer a big, strong European counterbalance to China. What are some of the...
I'm sure she's worried about both, but I think most of all she's worried about how Germany, this big, successful, gigantic force in Europe, how it conducts policy with the European Union, which has sort of shielded German power, made it acceptable to people as that falls away around her. Talking to Germans over the last few months as the Brexit vote neared, I heard a lot of anxiety about precisely this question, and I think we're going to see a Europe in which there will be a smaller group of countries with which Germany has shared interests, shared cultural values that will group around Germany. There'll be looser controls for the periphery, I suspect. But I think more broadly, the political issue here, economic globalization isn't going away in Germany or anywhere. But politicians have got to find a language to talk about how the wealth that it creates is shared and how people feel governed. Nationalism is people want to live in countries. How are they going to be governed so they feel some ownership? And I think that every single place.
I don't think we should be complacent about globalization. I think this is really important. This is a train that can stop and can get reversed.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, it will exactly do that.
You mean if there's a crack up?
Even if there's not a crack up, think about what this means for our own political process and what we're talking about here. We're talking about immigration, changing the way we view immigration, talking about tariffs on Chinese and Mexican imports, building walls. This is exactly opposite of what David is talking about. We're moving back from globalization, and globalization has been a net positive for the economy. Yes, there's winners and there's losers, and we have to be very careful about how we bring up the losers in all of this. But this is not inevitable. It can certainly reverse itself.
Yeah.
Global recession a possibility?
Yeah, well, statistically, global recessions happen about once every 8 years. So we're kind of, on track for it, even if this breakup wasn't happening. I would point out one thing about nationalism, too. Across the world, millennials tend to be more nationalistic than the older generation. It's interesting, in the UK, it was the younger people that wanted to stay in, but in many countries, China, Russia, there is a nationalistic group of younger people, and I think that this is something that is going to keep coming back. If we don't get the new rules of globalization right, we could be dealing with lots more populism in the future.
David, is there any, there are some regrets we see, but is there any chance this could be reversed at all?
I don't see how the real tragedy of what's just happened is that 17 million British people have given their political classes a mandate for something that cannot be delivered. They want continued prosperity, selling tons of stuff in and out of Europe to be a global free trading power, but they want to close the borders to any foreigners that we don't want to come in. And that can't be delivered. And so they've been lied to. So if you think this is the end of the anger, this is the beginning of the anger, because we just sort of revolt against the experts and the elites cannot now deliver what the people have demanded.
All right, well, unfortunately, that's going to have to be the end of the conversation for the moment, though I'm sure we'll come back to it. Thanks to all of you. And we'll be right back with news from our latest CBS News 2016 Battleground Tracker Poll. Stay with us.